It's my museum and I can do whatever I damn well please, and so that's what I do. Okay, the one just above the door is the Sharps rifles, and you who have been involved in history for quite some time probably recognize Sharps as being the father of the major guns that were used to slaughter the buffalo 100 and some years ago. And that would be correct. But there were other guns that were involved in it too. But the 1874 Sharp did a bunch. These are reproduction of Sharps. The top one is the Sile. The next one down in the center is a C Sharps over in Big Timber, Montana. And the second one is an 1875 C Sharps. C Sharps are absolutely just phenomenal guns today. Ever since Quigley Down Under, back 30 years ago, was put out, Sharps rifles have been selling like pancakes. In fact, they claim that every time there's a rerun of Quigley Down Under, Sharps spike in sales. And we shoot them all the time too. And so they're great guns. Next, two Sharps. Marlin guns kind of got a bad rap in my opinion, just like Savage did. Marlin started in the 1800s and made great guns that were comparable, if not maybe even better than some of the Winchesters. And they made lots of lever actions, and there was lots of good and bad guys that packed them. But these are a few of the Marlins. And just like the Winchester 410 shotgun with the screws in the buttstock, there's a very, very famous one right here with a little, kind of the blonde stock, and it'll come out in a future video too, so you're going to have to stay tuned for that one. But Marlin is a very historic, very well made, very collectible now. It wasn't that way early on. They were kind of a slow collector item, but today that is starting to change. This display right here are Mossburg. Mossburg, when I was a kid, was a major manufacturer of inexpensive shotguns. And sometimes they were marketed under things like Westernfield, J.C. Higgins, and things like this. But they were actually good shotguns. In fact, the first shotgun I ever shot doves with was a Mossburg 20 gauge bolt action shotgun. And the thing that might be interesting for you to understand is that my dad and my mother got a divorce just about at that time, and I loved to hunt. And so I went out and shot a whole bag of what I thought were doves. Gave them to my mother after I'd cleaned them, and she cooked them up and took them directly from the oven and threw them away because they weren't doves. They were killdeers. So now you know what I know about game animals too. Nobody really needs to talk about Smith & Wesson too much, just like Colt. They have been in business for 100 and some years. They've changed a little bit, and they've changed recently a little bit, but Smith & Wesson makes some of the best guns in the world, and obviously some of the best revolvers in the world. The Smith & Wessons you see that says S1, 2, 3, 4, and all the way down, that's on that half wheel is kind of how they were set up when they went forward. Now, that's not all of them. Smith & Wesson has got an array of many guns of different styles and so forth. So I'll do a video on Smith & Wessons. I'm not an expert on Smith & Wessons, but I've got a good friend of mine who is, and I'm going to see if I can have him come in when we do that video and help fill us in on some of the things I don't know. But S1 is the very first Smith & Wesson pistol made. That S1 is 22 short, copper case, black powder cartridge. That's the very first 22 cartridge that was used, was on that pistol. Of course, now we all know where 22 rimfire came from, and how hundreds of thousands, if millions, of rounds are made each year. And so we'll discuss those a little bit in a future video. The guns that you see just over the top of these guns are, and there's a bunch of them in the case here, are Ruger. Now, Ruger is not really an antique outfit, because they started making guns in the 1960s, but they most definitely are collectible, especially the ones they call 3-screw Rugers. At one time, Ruger made a pistol that was a little bit different, and then finally had those pistols sent back to their plant to make some revisions on it to make them safer. And when we have the video that comes out about Ruger, I'll explain that to you a little bit. But Ruger 3-screw pistols are very valuable today, and getting more valuable as time goes on. These three rifles that are just above this elk antlers are what they call long-range target rifles. They're muzzle loaders, but they're long-range target rifles, and they're good up to 1,000 yards, actually. These are not the only ones we have in here, but these are some of them. And as an example, the scope that you see on the very top one is not really a scope. It's a sight tube. There's no lenses, no magnification, and that particular theory has been in existence for a couple hundred years. And so even before scopes were involved, it was sight tubes that they used. And we'll discuss those in the video as well. Now, this long rifle right here is called a Matchlock. And the Matchlock actually came into being, it's my understanding, about 1600. And at the time that it came into being in 1600, it was more a novelty than anything. It didn't really have a particular use. People just liked the idea of it. It wasn't really good enough for game or wars at that time. And we'll do a short video on that one too, because it's interesting when you see how they really work. And in a video, you can see how they work and how they were loaded. And I bought this one from a guy who had a collection, and I thought, well, you know, I don't know what I'll ever do with it, but it looks interesting. So I'm glad I got it, because that's how all this really began. The Matchlock is one of the very beginnings of it. Okay, the next one you'll just kind of have to get a bit of a peek to here. The top section here is L.C. Smith and Parker shotguns. Both of those are just enormously famous in their own right. L.C. Smith actually made shotguns that were used by the Wells Fargo, for example, bought a bunch of them too. And Parker shotguns are just phenomenally important in history. Below that is, you'll see it says catalog guns. Well, there was a time in our history, and I talked a little bit about that earlier, where you could buy a rifle, pistol, or shotgun just by taking some money to the store. It didn't make any difference whether you were male or female or 6 or 60 years old. It just was the way it was. And so they had catalog guns. And there was a time in our history, and not too far back either, that Western Auto had guns. The Penny's had guns. Sears and Roebuck had guns. I mean, there was just a whole bundle of these big box stores that carried firearms and ammunition. And so catalog guns. This is the second to the last collection I have, and these are early English military guns. And of course, some of the military guns that they had then eventually in surplus and so forth turned out to be sporting guns later on. Some of you may remember Zulu Dawn and Zulu, the movies that they made of them, and on how the guns that were used over in Africa on the Zulu tribes. Some of these guns were what they used on that. And this is a cartridge that some of those guns use. And this cartridge, just to let you know that England never does anything halfway. This cartridge is called a 577 450 Martini Henry. Now, is that a handle or what? And the 577 was the parent case for this was the 577 Enfield that they necked down to 45 caliber, which became 450. Martini was the type of rifle, and I'll show you that in a minute, that shot the guns. Henry was the type of barrel, the riflings and the type of barrel that they had. So 577 450 Martini Henry. These are those guns that shot it. The top one is a 577 450 Martini short lever. The next one is a 577 long lever. The next one is, I'll explain that to you, and the other ones at the bottom, which are Snyder's, at another video. If you look at the heading up there, it says Fort Halleck Volunteers. We have a Cowboy Action Shooting Club here in Elko County that's called Fort Halleck Volunteers. There was an old fort that was here in the 1860s called Fort Halleck that was here to protect the overland mail and pioneers crossing through and so forth from marauding Indians. And so they had a fort, and so we thought that would be a good name. And so the guns that you see here are some of the guns that we use in shooting at the Fort Halleck shoots. And some of these are actually original guns. There's a few of them here, but most of them are reproductions of original guns. And you say, well, why would you do that? Well, if you had a gun for a pistol, say a Colt single action Army, that was worth $5,000, and you could buy one that was worth $700, which one would you shoot? And that's the reason, is sometimes the steel wasn't as good, but they're very valuable, and if they're not in really good shape, could actually be dangerous. So we shoot mostly reproductions, and these are reproductions. When you shoot two pistols, a rifle, and a shotgun on each stage. And it's great fun. If you're not involved in that at the moment, get yourself involved. Buy a couple guns, pistols, and so forth, and you can buy those for a lot cheaper than you can get an ATV, and you can feed yourself with one of these. You can't with an ATV. And so that's what these are here. Okay, these guns that's on this stool right here, you probably can tell they're rifles and pistols. Some of them are Colts and Smith & Wessons and Winchesters and Marlins, and what they represent is a time when, back in the old days, that they had the same cartridge used in the pistol as in the rifle. So when they got on their horseback, if they were hunting or whatever the deal was, they didn't have to swap ammunition back and forth. Both guns would shoot the same ammunition. And that was mainly only in 38-40, 44-40, and 32-20. I didn't want to have to get into Class 3 licensing and fully automatic guns and things like this. It made it just a lot simpler to have the stuff here, just like anybody else could have it in their home without having the special licensing requirements. And so that's the reason I stopped there. And the other thing is that I love history and I love antique guns, and I wanted to keep it at that level.